Well, hello, everyone, and welcome back for yet another episode of the Waterlife Debrief Podcast. I'm your host, Natalie Phillips. Today, I'm joined by none other than our discipleship pastor, Kevin Burns, and special guest, Next Gen pastor, Joshua Helms.
Whoop, whoop.
How's it going?
It's going pretty good.
Yeah, glad you're here with us today, but I'm not going to lie. Hate the circumstances, but I'm glad that you're here. So just to update our viewers today, maybe some of you all have had the opportunity to be in service with us over the last Sunday and today. But just to update, Todd's not here with us today because this past Friday, he did have to have prostate cancer removed, and glad to report that was completely successful. Things are looking great. Yes. And so he's at home recovering right now, and he's got a follow-up appointment here in about a week and a half or so. So just be praying over that, and that all goes well with that. But so we're going to be missing him here this week and probably next week, but he's determined. He's like, he was leaving on Thursday. He's like, maybe I'll mess around and come to staff meeting on Monday. I'm like, you better not. So y'all just be praying for him and his recovery, and just that he's able to just be patient and take it easy, even though that's not in his nature at all. But anyways,
you probably have to pray for Becky too.
Oh, pray for Becky. That's all I was like. Don't worry,
forget that.
I'm not going to forget about Becky. That's why. Yep, I was telling VIP meeting this
There's a
morning.
shout out to Becky Raswell.
Yeah, she's the best. She is the one behind the scenes making all things work, at the Braswell house, and so she holds it all down for them and stuff. So I know that this week and these weeks to come are going to be no exception to that, and she's fantastic. And so I know that God's gifted her to be able to take care of Todd and get him back to health. So
absolutely,
we're looking forward to that. So anyways, but today was a really good day. Despite Todd not being there, it was a really great day being in the church with our church family and just seeing everyone come together. And Joshua, you were able to deliver the message for us today. How'd you feel about everything?
I tried.
Yes, I know. Hey,
I enjoyed it.
You did a really great job.
Yes, you did.
We were talking about that before this. You've already gotten some good feedback and things like that. And so that's all you pray for is just, and you did. You prayed before the service, just like anything that you say, point back to Christ. And it certainly did. And people are already chatting about that. So it was good. Yeah. You did a good job. So what'd you talk about for those who maybe weren't there, or just kind of give a brief recap?
Yeah, so basically we just kind of looked at grace found in the promise, and so a lot of times when we look at grace, a lot of times it's very easy to just look at what the word means, that being something that we received that we didn't earn, didn't deserve, but a lot of times we forget like what that actually looks like for us. And so we were just kind of really looking at, well, hey, in the grace, understanding like you're not earning your salvation, you're not having to work your way back to God, or even if you've already given your life to God, like it's not about having to get yourself right again before He's going to start listening to you. It's just a matter of recognizing, just draw close to His presence, see your God for who He is, and let that be the focus. Yeah. And so that was really the drive home point today.
Yeah. Cool.
Yep.
Awesome. Yep. You did a good job. So today we came up with a couple just topics of discussion that we're going to go over today. And so the first one is going to be us really being able to receive that free gift of grace, because sometimes it just seems too good to actually be free. It's like, what's the catch? And then you also talked about how we're saved by grace and not works. So why are we called to work in service to others and in the church and different things like that? How do we show grace to others? How do we show that grace to others that we've so freely received? And then we're going to talk about just kind of daily decisions, accepting God's grace daily and walking in that daily. So those are just a couple things that we're going to cover, just to give everybody kind of an idea of what to expect as we trek through this next little bit. So we'll come in hot with that first one. So whenever we were talking to our friend earlier, he said something about the economy of exchange. And I was like, that is interesting play on words. I kept playing through, and then he explained it. And I was like, okay, I get it. So Tracy, he said, how do we overcome the economy of exchange and accept God's free gift of grace? And the meaning behind that is like, naturally, we are wired in our lives today just to really believe that nothing's ever really free. It's like, okay, you say it's free, but what is in the fine print underneath? Like, what does it really take? So like, Jesus paid such a high price. So how could it ever really be free? And so we just want to talk about like, what are some ways typically that in our lives we might catch ourselves trying to repay God or like earn that grace and different things like that. We just wanted to talk about a couple things we might see in our lives. Yeah.
Well, you want to kick it off?
Sure. Well, and I think about that, when you think about repaying or the economy of exchange, repaying or, we got to realize that, it did cost something. It was a high cost at the cross. Mm-hmm. And I think at times we can forget that. And I even challenge myself daily, but also every viewer, is going back to that day to where you receive that free gift of grace, and never getting over that, never getting past that, and realizing the cost at the cross. But when we think about earning it, a lot of times, and we've talked about this a lot of times it comes into bending towards legalism. You got to do this, you got to do that, you can't do this, you can't do this.
Define legalism for those who maybe, haven't grown up in church world, maybe don't know that term.
Well, legalism would, you go a lot of different directions on this, but legalism, basically can be defined as there's a list of rules, a list of guidelines that you've got to follow in order to be right with God. It's almost like you're building a resume instead of claiming God's righteousness to cover you. And I think, pride can go into that. Quite a bit. If I can do this, I can do that. Well, realistically, if we recognize grace, we can't do anything. We're only good because of His righteousness, only accepted because of what He's done. And so I think when we go to the economy of exchange, the thing that we've got to remember is that we exchanged His righteousness for our resume. And that grabs me every time even I say it.
Yeah.
And so, and of course, you mentioned, Ephesians 2:8-9, of course, that's a familiar passage. But then I thought of Romans 11:6, if by grace, then it's no longer the basis of our works. And so when we think about that and the reality of that, it is that, we submit, as you alluded to, and I love how you put that as well, as far as it's not just praying this, maybe you can talk about that a little bit, but it's submitting to Christ, that really gives the exchange when we go forward with that. But I think in general, it is realizing the exchange is our resume for His righteousness.
Yep. Boom. And I will say too, I know I kind of talked about a little bit about especially from like the sin perspective. And that was kind of what I was getting at today, of where, we get this like false understanding of like what we've got to do to get back that seat at the table, so to speak. And I know, like, for example, like the church I grew up in, that wasn't what they were trying to teach. But when certain things are not communicated, or when certain things, like, we don't think about how it's coming across to other people, like why or how we understand grace, that's when you start having a misunderstanding of like what it actually takes. And so, like, for me, we start looking at like how we try to repay God. I spent the longest time where every time I felt like I messed something up, I felt like, well, now I've got to get this right before God's going to hear me again, or it's like, oh, well, I need to read my Bible more, because we're being told that, and we should, but it's not, the reasoning is what matters. It's not a matter of doing it because that's the action that makes you more Christian. That's the action that is a result of the submitted heart, as we're drawing closer to Him and His presence. And so a lot of times when we're trying to repay it, it's not about the relationship. It's about earning favor. It's about trying to weigh out the scales a little bit differently to where it's in our favor. And so what happens is like, I found myself where, I grew up in the church. Like, I had an understanding of what it meant to be saved, from at least from the churchy Sunday school answer. Yeah. But then what was happening was, it's like I was constantly asking myself, well, did I pray that right? Did I phrase that right? Because I'd find myself like not being able to get past like certain things in life. And I'm thinking, well, as a believer, I should be able to do this. So if I'm not finding victory in this, then I must have done something wrong. I must not have met the mark. I must have dropped the ball. And so let me try better this time. Let me phrase this prayer differently. Let me pray about this differently. Let me spend time with God differently. And it's not that, trying to be intentional about like our time with Him shouldn't be a priority. But like that can't be the why, that can't be the how, that we're trying to obtain that grace. And I will say, like, just personal experience, like I struggled with that for a long time, just because I didn't have anybody, not that they weren't communicating it, but it's very easy for that to be something that a lot of times we don't realize when somebody's taking it the wrong way. And so then it's like you start taking on this whole burden of, well, God, I got to make it right. God, I'm sorry. God, I'm sorry. God, I'm sorry. And yes, that matters. We want to have that repentant heart, but at the same time, like, you're just kind of moving in the cycle. You're moving in the same spiral when you're trying to just make it right yourself rather than just letting Him do the work in you.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I guess, and I'm trying to think in my head, like, as you guys are talking, I'm trying to think of a way to kind of bring this in, but, like, I think it's important, like, because I was chatting with somebody the other day, and I can't remember if I talked about this on the last episode or not, but, like, basically she was talking to me, and she was like, I hear y'all praying, and I see y'all, like, leading studies, and I hear y'all, like, doing these things, and I just wish that I could be a Christian like that. And so, you know, and that broke my heart. It really did, because I'm like, and I wish that sometimes I'm like, every person that we talk to, and I guess we'll talk about this later when we talk about showing the grace to others that we've received, but just talking about, I guess just the way that it looks on the surface. And because that was one thing that I was thinking about this morning, because, and you did say, you were like, you can do all of these things and they are good things, you know? And so really just, because I was thinking in my head, I don't want anybody to think that, well, God, like, I've already received God's grace, and so these things aren't really important, because it is important, like, to do those things. And so that was kind of the second part of the question, is like, what are some ways sometimes that we kind of try to repay God? And so I kind of wanted to talk about that a little bit, like just some of the habits that we can catch ourselves getting into, like those checklist things that you were kind of talking about this morning, because I do want people to just like kind of see it like every day if you're doing these things, and you know, what's the purpose, like what's your heart posture behind doing those things. So I did want to talk about that with you guys.
Well, I think, you know, if you think about culture a little bit, is that we pay this and this is the profit, or we do this and we get the promotion, or whatever. We put in the effort and then this is how it's rewarded. I mean, just in the culture that we live in. And I think that's where people get confused with that a little bit, is that, you know,
and think
it's
I'm not a good enough Christian.
Correct.
Like, that's why I brought that up, because it's like, you know, I'm not a good enough Christian because I don't do those things well, or whatever.
Yeah, and Joshua alluded to it a little bit. It's not anti-effort. It's anti-earning. We can't earn our way up. And I think when you alluded to it just a minute ago, with we perform almost a checklist. And I was good at that for years.
Right.
I mean, I call it professional Christianity or Christianese, to where if I did this, I did that, I did this, you know, and then, oh, I'm a good Christian. But my heart was far from God, even though my actions look like a professional Christian. And, you know, then we get in a habit and we get in a rut of saying, okay, well, I did this, you know, well, God should have favor on me. You know, I did this, God should bless me. And so, you know, and that's where I think the mindset and perspective goes array.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, it is because we think, okay, if I do this, I do this. We can get so caught up. And realistically, I think we can get enslaved. You know, and that's where Hebrews 12:2 talks about, you know, throwing off those things that weigh us down. Because if we get in a mindset of, man, I've got to do this, I've got to do that, or, you know, I'm to be a good Christian.
Right.
Oh, no, I mean, again, you alluded to it. It's not our effort. You know, I like even how you used the sports analogies always draw me in.
Yeah.
And so, but I mean, you know, and that's where, I mean, there could be a list of checklists that we could do.
Yeah.
But it still falls short.
Yeah.
And that's why, you know, we're not worthy of the grace, but we're grateful for it.
Right.
Yep. Well, see, and also looking at like that repaying him for, you know, where we've fallen short. You know, a lot of times we do that is because it's almost like we're trying, cause I think the heart initially behind a lot of that is, you know, we're trying to draw near to God.
Yeah.
You know, we have the right intention.
Right.
But see, the whole thing, it comes down to having, like, actually walking with him, actually having the relationship with him. But see, and so a lot of times what we'll do is we look on our, you know, our day-to-day lives, and, you know, there might be seasons of our lives where, yeah, we might spend more time in the work, spend more time in prayer, you know, maybe we are spending a little more time in church. But as a whole, a lot of times we'll sit there and the whole rest of our week, we're going 100 miles an hour, and we never stop to have the relationship. And so what happens is so we're trying, because we know that there's a need, and so we try to dump it all in a short amount of time. And so it's like we're hardwiring ourselves to start thinking, hey, I've got to do this to make it right with God. And see, and that's part of the reason why, you know, one thing we've been doing, like even with our young adults and with the student leadership, you know, we've been starting to have these conversations about who the Holy Spirit is, and like biblically, you know, what does that mean for us? What does that relationship look like? Because I'll tell you right now, like when I was growing up, we talked about God the Father, we talked about God the Son, Jesus, you know, all day, every day. The most we ever talked about the Holy Spirit was if somebody sang Oceans one Sunday morning.
Oh,
Like that,
man.
like that was the
Yeah.
extent of it. And so there was such a misunderstanding because that's a third of who our God is.
Right.
That's where the entire relationship's taking place. That's where the direction, the power, the authority, everything, all the direction that we're given, like outside of the Word, but also alongside of it, is Him speaking directly to us. But if we've never learned how to listen to that, if we've never had that relationship,
Right.
well, we miss it.
Oh, yeah.
And seeing like in Galatians 5:22-23, you know, where it starts giving like the fruits of the Spirit. It's about like love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Well, every single one of those, if you look a few verses beforehand, you know, we see where Paul's instructing the people in Galatia. He says, walk by the Spirit.
Yeah.
It's not a command in the sense of like, hey, you got to do all these other things. If I'm walking by somebody or walking with someone, all it has to do is just paying them attention. I'm just watching them.
Yeah.
And I'm just following along the way. We see the same thing with the disciples where Jesus didn't say when they were out there fishing in the boats, hey, I need you to get your life together. I need you to understand the Word. I need you to get this right. And then you come follow me. No, He just said, follow me.
Yes.
And as they were drawing closer and closer to Him, it wasn't that their lives didn't stay the same, but their lives as a result started to change because of them being in the vicinity of Jesus,
Right.
because they were watching Him.
Yeah.
And see, and that's what we miss a lot of times. Like when we start trying to repay, it's because when we don't take time for the presence, we try to compensate and we start manufacturing what we think should be the end result, but it doesn't. Again, that's imperfect people trying to create a perfect outcome. It just doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
You know, and so that's why a lot of times it's easy if we're actually just stopping, like let go, like you mentioned, like take that burden off, quit worrying about everything else, and just focus on just being in His presence.
Right.
Just focus on Him, and He will make that change. He's the one that makes that difference with us. But unless we're willing to slow down, that's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
So.
And you mentioned earlier, you know, just never getting over like what God's done for you and the price that Jesus paid for us. And I think, I mean, that's been huge just in my walk with Christ, because sometimes like, and I've talked about it before, how I'll catch myself like, you know, thinking about whether it was a dumb decision I made or whatever. And now I catch myself where I used to feel like condemnation or whatever, like, oh gosh, you know, and that was me whenever I first started in ministry. I was like, God is like never going to use me to do His work, because like all of the things that I had done and all of the mistakes that I had made. And so it used to just be like, oh, you can't be bold in this. You can't speak up about this because you got this wrong in so many different ways. But now it comes from a place of whenever I have those thoughts and whenever like, you know, flashbacks come and different things like that, I stop in the moment and I'm like, you know, you highlighted it this morning, that verse, but God, you know, I'm like, I can literally think, yes, I did all of these things, and to some people I may still be known as those things, but the most important thing is that as soon as Jesus stepped into my life and as soon as I surrendered in that moment, I had that but God moment, and now I have but God moments like every day, anytime that I think those things. And just like that conversation I had the other week, and she said, you know, I wish I could be a professional Christian like you were talking about. And I'm like, girl, if you only knew, and it's funny because, I mean, the three of us, as we sit here in this circle, anybody that you see in any kind of church, like staff, any realm of, you know, ministry work and stuff like that, like we're all still dealing with things. Like we all have our stuff that we still carry and that we're still chiseling away at. And that's where God's daily grace, and we're going to talk about that later, steps in and it covers it for us. And so it's like, never take yourself out of what God has done in your life, the way that His grace has already covered you as soon as you accepted Him, but also just that daily grace that He's covering you each and every day. And don't ever let Satan get a foothold in your mind thinking that you can't, you know, step into God's grace or step into whatever it is that He's called you to do because something from your past is holding you back or something like that. That's always been a huge thing for me in my life.
Well, actually, I want to talk about real quick. I know you were sitting there saying like, don't let the enemy get in your head and stuff like that. Because I will say, so when I was, back when I was at USC, so I say probably like freshman, sophomore year. So during that time, you know, there was a lot that God was kind of showing me that I realized growing up was not what I thought it once was, like in a good way, you know, of like really understanding my faith a whole lot more. And anyway, so He was, you know, teaching me a lot of things during that time. But what was happening was it was that still trying to earn that place, trying to repay it a lot of ways. Right. And so there'd be certain days where I'm like, y'all, I got it figured out. Like, I'm ready to go. And I was on cloud nine. I was sitting there walking right through campus. I'm sitting there thinking, I'm about to lead all these people to Jesus. Like, I'm ready to go. And then it'd be like right after the fact, and I would do something stupid, like something stupid leave my mouth, stupid decision making, whatever.
Right.
And I'm just sitting there thinking, I'm like, how can I not get this together?
Yeah.
Well, the reason I wanted to mention that is because every single time that happened, my first instinct was every time I'd be around another group of believers, whether it's the collegiate ministry I was a part of or churches I was in, didn't matter. Every single time I started to isolate. Every single time I started to pull away because, again, like you were saying, like I felt like I was not that professional Christian. I felt like I dropped the ball.
I still don't have this figured out. I can't be in with this group of people.
Exactly. And I started sitting there thinking, I'm like, if anybody, in my mind at the time, I was like, I should know this. I grew up in church. I'm the one, I should have this figured out. So am I a fraud? Am I a phony? And it was just because I didn't understand like simple things. But at the time, I just didn't understand that. And so I started to isolate. And I say that because, we read through scripture, we look at, when Jesus, right before he started his ministry, he was out in the wilderness for 40 days. Well, during that time, that's when Satan was directly trying to tempt him, trying to stop the will of God, trying to stop his plan. And the reason why is because that's when he was alone. And see, and that's what happens. And I can say that from personal experience of just like, when you're talking about like just not letting the enemy get in our head. Absolutely. Like we can't be letting that thought process of like, oh, well, I'm just not good enough, or oh, I can't be a part of this. We can't let that take over, because at the end of the day, every single time we do, eventually we're going to choose to isolate in some way, shape, or form.
Right.
Even if you could be fully here every single Sunday, every single Wednesday, every time the doors are open, but still not be open.
Right.
Still not be vulnerable, still not having genuine conversations, still not having true accountability and encouragement that you find only in the church. But it's due to that isolation, because we start pulling away every single time we think we don't measure up.
Yeah. And I hope people really know that. Like, that's one thing that I really try to, whenever people come to us with prayer requests or people come to us to talk in the office, like, I literally just try to tell them, like, I'm totally unfazed by what you're telling me right now, because I know that is just a scheme of the devil. Like, I am so serious, and I can look them in the face. And like I said, I know that sometimes he will talk to us just about just the most devastating things going on in their life. And that's why I'm so thankful. And they know Jesus too, but it's like whenever we're in these hard seasons of life, it's so easy to like lose sight of that. And so it's so important, like you were saying, to be in the church and have relationships with people in your church, because I can honestly say, and Todd talks about it all the time, if you come in and talk to our staff about anything, or any of our life group leaders, and we try to train them up in this way, like, people are going to talk to you about things, and they're going to be vulnerable with you about things, and you have to truly believe, like, okay, what you're telling me right now, what you're going through right now is the scheme of the devil, and you cannot let him win. Like, the devil is not more powerful than God's grace. It's not more powerful than the plans that God has for you. Like, this is just, a valley that you're walking through right now, a storm that you're walking through right now, but it's going to be okay, because we know that God's good, and we know that God's got a plan. So like you said, be connected with the church and be willing to have those hard conversations.
Well, I think it's important, you both have alluded to it, is that realizing that nobody's outside the reach of God's grace.
Right.
It doesn't matter if you've been saved a day, an hour, or 50 years, is that the devil's going to try to get you, and going to succeed. We can always say try,
right?
But going to succeed to get you to fail and to fall. But it's God's grace that picks you back up.
Right.
I think about it, I've been saved for some time, but I wish I could say perfection, has happened. No, I continue to fall,
right.
But, I always use the boxing match when I talk to people, is that, okay, devil knocks me to the mat, I got to get back up. I got to go at it and fight more. And fight harder, put up those boundaries, put up those barriers, but realize that you talk about condemnation, you talk about guilt or shame, or any of those tools the devil will use. It's not that we need to clean up to receive God's grace. It's not that we need to do anything, but just receive God's grace and receive what he did was for us.
Right.
And I think that starts at the cross, but it's really reminding ourselves of daily, and that's where we get victory daily.
Right. Yeah. And you talked about pride this morning. I think it was maybe in the first service, and you had talked about, like, sometimes we see pride as like somebody saying, well, I'm better than that or whatever. But really, it's just this something inside of us that just tells us like, hey, I've got this.
Yeah.
Like, I don't need to depend on God's grace. I don't need to open up about this struggle. I don't need to give this struggle to God. Like, I've got this. I don't need to bother God with what I have going on, And so I think, we're talking about shame, condemnation, different things like that. But I think pride like plays the more that, like, I feel like I've been hearing it more and more over the last couple of months, just podcasts and sermons that I'll watch and stuff. And I really think that pride creeps into us like so much easier than I ever really even thought. I was like, oh, that I guess that is pride rearing its ugly head. And so sometimes pride can definitely keep us from fully walking into God's grace too. So I liked how you covered that this morning.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Well, seeing that pride, I mean, it plays such a big role because it's one of the, like for me, my biggest pet peeve is when I see pride. Like if I see pride in somebody, it honestly, like it takes everything in me to keep my cool. Like I just, I can't, like it fires me up.
Right.
Like kind of like the second service, like I'm ready to, ready to go. But I say that because at the same time, even when that pride's there, it's so easy for us to not realize when we're full of that same pride. Oh, yeah. I mean, and it's just, it's not that we do it intentionally, but it's just a matter of, because again, like we're just so hardwired to try to think doing it my way but that's arrogance to think that, again, that imperfect person is just going to magically have the right answer, magically be able to figure it out, magically be able to do this, that, or the other. And so it just comes back down to, of like, are we willing to address that pride? Because again, that Romans 10:9, because if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe that God raised from the dead, you'll be saved. Well, that confessing Him as Lord, again, is that submission of the heart. Mm-hmm. So that submission of the heart cannot go hand in hand with me being prideful, thinking I've got it handled. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Like I cannot leave.
You said it this morning, like the demons like believe that He is, that He rose from the dead. Like they believe that full well and they hate it, Right. So it's like there are things like, to be a believer, like, like you were talking about confessing and making Him the Lord of your life and surrendering your heart like that has to take place. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But absolutely. Again, so as we're kind of segueing into that, you talked about how that initial confession and belief has to be in place, and so you can kind of talk about that a little bit more. But so we want to talk about like it's not through works that we do. Right. So I want to kind of segue into that a little bit because sometimes it's easy to get caught up in that too, because we hear all the time whenever we're around church and different things like that. You had kind of already hit on it earlier about getting in the Word and showing up on Sundays and showing up on Wednesdays and serving our partner ministries and serving, in the ministries we have here on Sundays. And so you hear us talk about that all the time. Well, why is it important for us to do that if, we've already done the part of accepting Jesus and confessing that He's Lord and surrendering, we've already done that part. So why are these other things important if it's not our works that save us?
Well, see, that's the thing. If we are, because that's a good question, because if we are truly submitting, which that's what it's about, it has to do with condition of heart. If we're truly submitting, then therefore would our desires, our heart, not also start to reflect Him? Yep. Right. So it's just a matter of, it's not a matter of doing the actions, but the actions will come. That's why Jesus even talks about like knowing a tree by its fruit. It's not saying that, in order to know if you're a good Christian, you've got to do X, Y, Z. Right. No, it's just saying X, Y, Z is going to happen as a result of you having the relationship with Him. And so my question would be, and this isn't a matter of, people not being able to have assurance in their salvation, but it does come down to, hey, are you living a complacent life? Are you living that lukewarm faith? Because at the end of the day, like that's not really faith. Because faith is, yes, you got the belief, but you can't help but act on it because you know the promises. You have hope and trust in what God's already told you He's going to do. Yeah. And so when it comes to serving in whatever capacity, I mean, I know we're constantly looking and praying about, leaders stepping up, whether for any of our teams, but I know even for like our kids ministry or student ministry right now, we're got some big things on the horizons of like what's coming up. And so part of that is we're praying about is leaders stepping into those roles. Mm-hmm. Well, what good is that going to do if nobody ever feels any conviction to serve? Right. There's only so far that the ministry is going to grow. And that's just because at the end of the day, it's not a matter that people have to, we got to serve out of obligation. That's not the case. Right. But if you truly believe your God has made you alive again, absolutely. If you're recognizing truly what He's pulled you out of, if you're truly just focusing on just being in that relationship with Him, it's the same thing as growing up. Anytime I did something wrong, you might feel for a moment that you got away with it. But anytime any kind of authority figure, whether it's a parent, grandparent, friend of the family, whatever, but any kind of authority figure was sitting right there with you and you messed up, weren't smiling too big about it then.
Mm-hmm.
Because yes, there was the consequence, but more importantly, especially when it's an authority figure, you value their opinion. I feel like I let them down.
Mm-hmm.
So all I could think about was I want to make it right, not in the sense of earning it. Again, like with this stuff with grace, it's not that we're earning it, but it should be that our heart starts to break over the same things that breaks God's heart too.
Absolutely.
You know, like
Right.
our desires start to shift. And so like for us, like that's what it comes back to, is just making sure that, again, it's not a matter of just serving out of obligation or because you hear somebody say something on Sunday morning or whatever. But like us serving should be a reflection, because is that not the same model that Jesus gave when it washing the disciples' feet? Like he made it very, very clear. We're called to serve because that's the heart of who he is.
Right.
You know, he wanted to make sure that that nature that we're supposed to have, that humility and recognizing, just seeing him for who he is, that's the very foundation of us accepting that grace. And so if we're not willing to be humble, if we're not willing and we're just complacent with just going about through life, well, there's a good chance we haven't really fully submitted, or at least there's an area of our life that hasn't been submitted.
Correct.
Right,
So-
right. It's like you said, it's not questioning your salvation
Right.
necessarily, but it's just like, okay, where are you at on these things?
Yep.
Because it's important to Jesus. It should be important to us.
Mm-hmm.
I think it goes back to what you alluded to, is works are not the root of our salvation, but the fruit of transformation.
Right.
And those are some big words, but all that means is there's been a change in our life. We've accepted the free gift of grace. He has changed us. And so therefore, I mean, even the Bible says, work out your salvation. Or James says in James 2, it says, faith without works is dead. Because others should see a difference in you. When you think about the culture that we live in, you know, that is hopeless, that doesn't have much joy, okay, is not at peace, okay, the fruit of a Bible-believing, you know, a follower of Christ is that grace has made a difference and should be on display for others to see.
Right.
And so it's not, you know, to earn righteousness or to earn a resume or to get more acceptance with God. It's, you know, God, you've done a great work with me and in me and continue to do. And that's why if we stay close to God and daily as we fall, we get back up and we rest in that grace, then that continues to motivate us, continues to drive us. Because again, we're continually accepting that grace,
Right.
you know, of God.
Yeah. Well, that's good. We'll go ahead and segue. You know, we were going to talk about how do we show the grace to others that we have received. And so you had mentioned in your sermon this morning, you said if we're walking around carrying burdens in the same way that the world does, how are they supposed to know how we've been transformed by God's grace? So why don't you dive into that a little bit more? Any thoughts you have on that?
Yeah, well, it's one of those, I don't want to say sensitive issues, but it's one of those that can kind of stir the pot a little bit.
Right.
Because what happens
What?
is,
You
I
stir
know,
the pot?
heaven
I
forbid.
don't know.
It's not like I like pushing buttons or anything.
know.
Just get in there. But no, it was funny because like if you think about like the church in the traditional sense, and when I say traditional sense, I'm not talking about traditional like historically, like what the early church was supposed to be and was, but I'm talking about like the traditional church, like today, what we would imagine,
Right.
where again, it's kind of like that legalistic kind of mentality and stuff. How often, I would say, like, because a lot of people in our church we know have come from different churches, different backgrounds, stuff like that. What percentage of people do you think probably came from a background? And I say probably because we know for a fact, because we hear it all the time, of where it's like I felt like I was going through my whole life being told, you need to do this,
Yep.
you need to do this, you need to do this, or you need to make this change, you need to do this differently, you need to, and it's one thing to say God's word says otherwise,
Yeah.
because that's a matter of speaking truth.
Right.
But when we switch the narrative and we start talking about it from the sense of you need to, we're indirectly discipling people into thinking they've got to earn their way again.
Correct.
And so what happens is like then they start looking at your life the same way. And so either they see it doesn't matter when you fail or even when you are succeeding. It's that defeated mentality again. And so what happens is like they're seeing you striving to try to meet a quota, so to speak, a spiritual quota. But then they hear you turn right around and try to sing about having joy in the Lord. It doesn't math. Like it doesn't add up.
Yeah.
And so it's that same thing. It's like when it comes to that grace that we have, you know, that's why it's so important for us to understand this stuff and understand like how we're actually communicating this, because the way we communicate it is not just from a stage.
Yeah.
It's not just
Yeah.
from a Bible study.
Yep.
Right.
The way we communicate grace is based on how are we living our lives.
Mm-hmm.
Because it doesn't mean that we're complacent. We are absolutely living on fire for the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
But that heart submitted, it's the same thing with the apostles. They were willing to put it all on the line because it was heart submitted.
Right.
Had nothing to do with their actions.
Mm-hmm.
But it had to do with, I've submitted His way because I'm trusting what's to come.
Right.
I'm trusting His plan. I'm trusting His promise. And that's what it was all about to begin with. And that's what made them so effective, because everybody saw it had nothing to do with them. They literally could not be stopped because it was the hand of God at work.
Mm-hmm.
And so people were able to clearly see that when it was no longer about what was going on with them. That's why we were even reading today, is where in that Ephesians 2, in verse 8, he said, "For by grace you've been saved through faith." And he said, and this is not your own doing, it is the gift of God, not a result of works. But he says, so that no one may boast.
Mm-hmm.
As in, it was, the whole reason was to prevent the pride, keep the focus away from the
Right.
wrong thing. It's
Right.
make it clear that this is absolutely the work of God. And see, and when we start trying to earn our way, we're not conveying that.
Mm-hmm.
We're not relaying that message. And so if the very people that say they're sold out for God are not only not able to live for Him, but they're not submitted, and they're also not at peace in that, well, to me, that doesn't sound like a transformed life.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So then why would anybody ever feel the need to do that? That's why a lot of times people come into a church, and that's why they don't get plugged in. That's why they're not serving. That's not why they're doing a lot of different things, because to them, they start seeing it as another obligation.
Right.
And if you got a church as a whole that's seen as an obligation, well, in reality, what's happening is they're either coming from or are currently in a background that's still a saved by works mentality.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter what you teach, but what you're living is what you're actually believing.
Yeah.
And so that's where a lot of that comes from.
So I guess the way that you can see it is like, like you were talking about the fruits of the Spirit earlier. So like the Spirit will put these things in us and like prompt us to do these things and serve and give and do all that stuff. And the church is just giving you avenues to be able to do that. Is that a way that people could just kind of look at it? Like, you'll have that drive. It's not that we're trying to like hire you or like, whatever.
Right.
It's like, we each should have, God has given us all these different gifts. Like we're all wired a different way. And I know that people who want to serve, you send them the spiritual gift assessment. That's something new that we've started doing. And we've just already seen people filling that out. And it's just like, maybe sometimes you're like, wow, I didn't even really know that I was wired to do that. But now I can kind of see it. So it's like once, we kind of help you take these steps because we know that God has wired us to do these things. So we just give you avenues to fulfill that. It's nothing about, us and like how good our church is and how like, even though our ministries are great and things like that, it's not so that you can be a great person, part of a great ministry. It's like we're all working together, to accomplish those things, I guess.
Well, I think what triggered in my mind is, of course, here at Waterlife today was Wavemaker Sunday,
Right.
where they went through some of the Connect Camp statements. And, God loved, God gave, we believe, we receive.
Right.
How better way to talk about grace than just that? When we think about grace, okay, it's because of God's love. Okay, when we display grace, okay, are we displaying love to somebody else? Okay, when we think about grace, we also think about God forgave. Okay, as we display grace to others, are we forgiving to others?
Right.
And that we don't have to, be so deep about it. And I'm not discounting that at all. But don't go too far. Just like when you said serve. Okay, why do we serve? Because He served us.
Right.
And so we serve others.
Right.
It's just what we receive, what we believe, we display and we give out.
Right.
To where we're conduits, of God's grace. Not cul-de-sac, we're just going in circles. But again, it comes in, we grasp it, we get it, and then we give it out.
Right.
Whether it be love, forgiveness, service,
Right.
Other avenues.
Yeah, it was cool. And hopefully this ties in a little bit, but I was watching this reel that popped up the other day, and I guess they had the K-Love Fan Awards, not long ago. And different people have different opinions about Christian artists accepting awards and things like that. But anyways, Brandon Lake was on there, and I love Brandon Lake anyways, but I know that probably, I guess like a year or so ago, he had done the Hard Fought Hallelujah with Jelly Roll, and people were just like, he's dipping his toes in the secular world, and like there were a lot of people who were like up in arms about it. Now there were some people who were like, this is great, that's what we should be doing. And naturally, whenever you record a song with secular artists, it kind of puts you into he went on like a secular award show because Jelly Roll had like won an award for that song. So Brandon Lake was then on there. So people were like, see, he's accepting these awards, he's like doing whatever. And so then he did another one with Lainey Wilson. Like, he's been with a couple secular artists after that, and he was accepting his award the other night, and he said, he was just talking about how people have given him such a hard time about that. He was like, I don't know about you, but if I'm in a room that's full of light, I know that there must be a room in the house somewhere else that's filled with darkness, and I want to go there and shine my light. And so he's like, you have no idea how, like, whenever I step into these places, how much people want truth and how much people want grace and how much people, like, they're craving this, because we're all made in the image of God. So we're all created with that hole in us that like can only be filled by God. And so sometimes the only way that people are going to see that is through the way that we display the love of Christ, the way that we show grace, the way that we communicate with people who maybe aren't like us and don't look like us, and all of these different things. And so I loved, oh my gosh, I don't think I could have loved that clip of him enough just saying that, because I was like, it's so true that sometimes we get so caught up in our circles and in church world and different things like that, and it's so hard to look outside, or it's so hard to just look at people and, like you said earlier, just think, oh, they're just so far from God's grace, like they're just so far off the rocker, like there's no way that they'd ever, but I mean, again, they're people that are made in the image of God, and they, like, God wants to extend his grace to them as well, and they can receive that too. So I just thought that was really cool. But I mean, that's one thing, and I know that God always, like, he's chipping away on us slowly, and I think that that's something that I have had to learn. It's like you feel like, and I know I've talked about it on here before, but again, talking about like traditional church and things like that. Growing up, something I heard was like, people would say they went down to the altar at a tent revival, and they came up and the sky was clear and it was blue and it was and there were no problems, and they were just changed. And I know Pastor Todd talked about maybe a week or so ago, like, he had a buddy whose change was radical like that. Like, he went to a tent revival over the weekend and he came back the next Monday and he wasn't smoking. He wasn't like doing any of these things. And so don't get me wrong. Sometimes, like I said, the Holy Spirit can definitely like take things away in an instant that you feel convicted about. Right. But anyways, I do think it's important for us to realize, like, sometimes this is going to sound so funny, y'all. Please don't laugh at me too hard. But, whenever you're doing like a diet, okay, and you kind of hit a plateau, like if you're trying to lose weight and different things like that, and you're doing a certain diet, and then you kind of hit a plateau and nothing happens anymore. And so anyways, I kind of think about that, how like sometimes in our walk with Christ, and I was just chatting with somebody this morning during prayer time, sometimes we're going along in our walk with Christ and it kind of feels like, I feel like I'm far from God, or I feel like maybe he's not talking to me anymore, or I feel maybe that, this isn't being extended my way anymore. But anyways, I think it's important for us to just continuously look at the different ways that God might be working on us. And like you were saying in the example that you gave earlier, it's important for us to not feel like we have it all figured out. And it's like, I've got this Christianity thing on wraps. Like, he's slowly working away at us. So another reason I bring that up is sometimes I get irritated because I see people who claim the name of Jesus, come to church every week, blah, 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 but they can be some of the most down in the mouth people ever. And I look at it and I'm just like, oh my gosh, kind of like, but like you talked about, it's like, that doesn't really seem like a transformed life, like somebody who is just constantly down the mouth, like, poor pitiful me, like, this is awful. But then, like I said, then we turn around and we can be guilty of the same exact thing. Mm-hmm. So it's really important to not cast stones and to not, but you have to totally be aware that, you're carrying Christ's name with you all the time. So how are you representing him? And it's not that you like put on a face or you put on a facade or anything like that, because we all have struggles and different things like that. But like you said, if if you're just constantly living in this rut, and because we all go through seasons, we all go through valleys where, we might have a harder time, looking at the brighter side of things. But it's like if you're continuously in that mindset and you're like bringing other people down with you, like if you come in the room and you just kind of suck the life or the air out of a room, like that probably needs to be evaluated. No, sorry, buddy, we're talking to you, but no. Anyways, that's just that's just kind of something that I was thinking of, is like God is slowly chiseling away at all of us all the time. So we do have to have grace to understand, like, maybe some people, just struggle in other areas that we may not struggle with, like, but anyways, yeah.
Well, and I will say too, I mean, that's one thing that a lot of times because we know that we're also flawed, a lot of times we're hesitant to even have that conversation with somebody. And but there's that difference between, casting the stone versus the accountability.
Right.
That casting the stone is recognizing, or the casting stone is me saying, hey, I've got it together, you don't. You need to get it together, which again is that very thing that teaches that legalistic mentality.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Whereas that accountability is saying, hey, as a brother or sister in Christ, I want to let you know, like, this isn't of God. Mm-hmm. Because what you're doing is, same thing with, like, the fruits of the Spirit. That's our compass to recognize what's of God and what's not. Mm-hmm. Because there's, like, with those 9 fruits of the Spirit, there's not a single sin we commit without violating one of those.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
And so if we're able to recognize the things of God, well, then we know how to point out what's of God and what's not. And it's the same thing with those conversations, just speaking truth into that, speaking boldly into that. Again, not pointing a finger at them, but just saying, hey, I just want you to know that's not of Him, so that they recognize when they're drifting from the presence. That's what it's about. Mm-hmm. And the thing is, it's like, well, so then how do we make sure that we're, staying, focused on that? And I've used this analogy all the time, but like with, riding motorcycles and everything, they tell you all the time, like when you're going through a turn, whatever you do, make sure you keep looking like at the road up ahead of you, because if you look off the side of the road, that's exactly where you're going to go. Mm-hmm. You can go into the tree, go into the ditch, nature's hammock, whatever. And like at the end of the day, that's not what you're wanting to do. So what do? You keep looking at the road to make sure you're where you need to be. But see, it's the same thing with our walk. And like in Philippians 4, 8, 9, Paul writes, finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there's any excellence, if there's anything worthy of praise, think about these things. What you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, practice these things. But he says, and the God of peace will be with you. It's not that peace as in like there's not stuff going on, but it's that resolution of conflict. Mm-hmm. It's where you're not that spiritual battle anymore, because in that moment, if you are focusing on the things of God, again, wherever you're looking, guess what direction you're going to go in that direction. Right, yeah. So if you're looking at the things of God, well, naturally, you're going to start gravitating more towards that, to where eventually you start looking more and more like that too. Mm-hmm. That's just by default. And so what happens is that's when that conflict starts to disappear. Mm-hmm. It's because now we're at peace, because we're walking in tune with the decision that we made, because we're walking in tune with the Spirit, walking in tune with our God. Right. And it's that same thing, again, if we're not doing that though, or we're recognizing that, like whether it's within the church, our families, our friends, even ourselves, like what's happening is you're conveying a completely different message, right? Because now you're saying, yeah, I made a decision, but at the same time, I'm going to keep focusing on that negative. I'm going to keep focusing on what I don't like. Well, people can sit there and say, oh, well, I'm a very appeasable person. I try to get along well with people. But at the end of the day, I didn't like how somebody talked to me this morning. Well, you're one thread away from breaking up a church over the carpet. Mm-hmm. It's the same dynamic. Right. It's because, again, what do you focus on? It becomes about the things that matter to me, which again is that prideful, it's about me, and it starts drifting away from the other. But see, that's how quickly, if we're not careful, and it's not a matter of, hey, you got to get this together. But it's a matter of, what are you focusing on? Mm-hmm. Are you focusing on His presence? Because if you are, it's going to be that stuff that's true, honorable, just, lovely, excellent. Like that's what you're going to drift towards.
Right.
But you're going to be focusing and drifting on the things of God. But if you start focusing on what does not matter at the end of the day, every single time it's going to come back down to works-based, because you're not listening. So the relationship with the Holy Spirit isn't being paid attention to. So you're trying to compensate for it. So it's going to be focused on self. And then at the end of the day, you're actually hurting the spread of the gospel at that point, because people are no longer seeing Christ for who His word says that He is. So,
and realistically, who's winning there? The devil's winning.
Yep.
Right.
I mean, and it's a daily battle of spiritual warfare, the flesh and the spirit.
Yep.
And so again, when we're not walking by the Spirit, we're being drawn into actions or attitudes or mindsets of the flesh. And so that's where it's a constant battle. And I think it all circles back to, is discipleship. Is how are we being discipled? And it's not just by coming to church. Coming to church is a great thing,
Right.
but that is not being discipled.
Yep.
Right.
And you've seen it, I'm sure, in your ministry as well, Joshua. Natalie, you've seen it here. I've seen it throughout the years. Is that people, fall one way or the other, or go fix their eyes on one thing or the other, and justify one thing or other because they haven't really seen the truths of God's word, and that falls back to discipleship. And when you go back to grace, okay, again, the righteousness instead of the resume, or flowing from the identity that we have in Christ rather than our activity. It is understanding some of those truths in Scripture over some of the cultural ways.
Yep, that's true. All right. Well, something we'll close out on today. We just wanted to talk about basically walking in God's grace daily. And we've kind of covered some of it, throughout our conversation today. But the question specifically was, how would your daily decisions, relationships, and even struggles look different if you truly lived from a place of being made alive in Christ instead of trying to prove that you're worthy? So we just want to talk about, what might change in our life, the decisions that we make, our relationship dynamics, and some of the struggles that we go through. If we can, like you said earlier, just remember what Christ has done for us, and then just think about how great God's grace truly is.
Yeah. Well, I know for me, you can sit there and have all the greatest intention in the world. I keep making the jokes about the sign language out the window driving the vehicle. But
I've seen it a few times coming out of that Rubicon.
Yeah.
Probably. I'm just
kidding.
kidding.
That's
No.
somebody else. No.
No, but I will say, it is a pet peeve of mine, though. I get, if you've got to drive over the speed limit, that's on you. You should have left earlier. But if you can't hit the speed limit, move. Now you're holding up everybody else that's, trying to do what they need to do. But I say that because, you could have all the best intentions in the world and be waking up thinking, God, I'm living for you today. I'm living for you today. Living for you today. And then you have that, well, I can tell you right now, anytime that happens, it takes me a minute. I have to I got to reevaluate, make sure, that's what's going through my mind. I need to, not get frustrated, just be patient, let them do their thing, and keep moving on. And usually it's somebody that I'm surprised they can still see the road,
Right.
It's just, and had I known that on the front end, probably would have been a little more graceful about it, in my mind, at least the thoughts wise. But that's the thing is in those situations, it's it derails our line of thought to where then the rest of the day, it's so easy for us to keep letting that just snowball time and time and time again. And again, it's because it's a matter of, I need to get back on track.
Yeah.
I need to get my thoughts right. I need to keep myself in check. I need to do this.
That effort.
Right.
Yeah.
And it comes back down to every single time. And every time that happens, I don't know about everybody else, but I can't ever get back on track. There's still that one part of me that I feel like I'm slipping if I'm thinking through it that way.
Right.
But see, when we truly understand His grace, it's no longer about getting back on track. It's just recognizing it's hey, I know I'm recognizing maybe whether it's my sin in the moment or where I fell short, but where's God?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
That's the only question that matters. Because if we're saying, but where's God? We know He's in every situation. We know that He's around us. We know that He's working through us and in our lives. But if I ask the question of where is God at? Where is He? What it's forcing me to do is I'm having to look. And again, it's where our focus goes, that's where we start to go. So in that moment, it's not a matter of correcting a decision. It's just being aware of His presence. Because as I start to notice that, I start paying attention oh, this is of God or this is not. Well, suddenly, again, the behavior automatically starts to shift. So then that way, I actually am being able to, I can de-escalate. I can get my thought process back on track. I can keep myself in check. I can hold myself accountable because at the end of the day, I'm not doing it. Mm-hmm. It's just a matter of it happens by default because I'm drawing closer to Him, because I'm focusing on His presence. But it comes down to just, are we asking the question of what do I need to do to fix this? Or is it a matter of asking just, where's my God at?
Mm-hmm.
I think as we grasp it, what just triggered with that is that sometimes we can pose to be one thing and we're not, or we can pretend to be one thing or not. Mm-hmm. What we've got to do is live in that freedom that's found in John 10:10, whereas the devil comes to steal, kill, and destroy, but He's come. Why has he come? That we might have abundant life, or a life full of it. And so when we see that and we grasp that it comes through him, then we will display. For 2 Corinthians 5, it talks about, that we are a new creation. Okay, the old is gone. And that doesn't mean that it doesn't keep coming back up.
Right.
When you think about it, we talk about, you read from Philippians, just a minute ago. You preached from Ephesians just a minute ago. Okay, we're going to be in Colossians next week. Okay, who wrote those?
Paul.
That's Paul.
Yep.
When we think about where he came from, and he was a real dude that I'm sure was battling some of those evil and fleshly desires. Okay, but he still was driven to intentionally, put the grace of God in effect on display, and that's how he helped many different churches. Yep. I think it comes with one word: intentionality.
Yep.
Intentionally looking back to see where the grace of God grasped me and captured me, and then intentionally looking forward to live it out.
Yep. And that's what I think is so cool about Paul. Like, he's such a clear illustration of like what living in grace looked like, because it wasn't all his action. What was he doing? He was stoning people. He was killing them, chasing them all over the place. He was not at all living for Christ. He was literally let me be your number one enemy, buddy, and I want you to know it. So it's by no work of his own. But yet what happened? Here he is fighting for the lost.
Yep.
Here he is, all this stuff. And so again, it has to do with that's what living in grace is. There was nothing complacent about Paul, but it was through his recognition, because what was happening? He was focusing on Christ.
Yep.
Every single time, because everything he's talking about, he puts the focus. It's always pointing the finger at Christ. Look at him.
Right.
Not him, not me, but him.
Yep.
Look at him. Look at him. Look at him. And as you see him doing that time and time again, you just hear his speech get more and more and more bold. And again, because it wasn't him making the decision. And yes, he would have had his own stuff that he was dealing with. And he even talks about the thorn in his flesh. That's a whole other thing. But he had his own struggles. But again, every single time it came back to let me point to who Christ is and being aware of his presence, because every single time the action followed. And see, if that is not a definition of what living in grace looks like, I don't know what is, personally.
Right.
So.
And one thing that just comes to my mind is that the fact that that's available for everyone. I love how whenever Pastor Todd talks about these people in the Bible, it's like these are events. These are historical events that happen. These are historical people that this happened to. These are not made up stories. We grow up here's this Bible story. Well, it's not a story. It's these things really happened. And again, my mind just keeps going back to that conversation that I had. Just I wish that I could be a Christian like you. I wish that I could, whatever. And to me, I just think that people, it's so easy just to get caught up in our everyday life and our everyday struggles. And like I said, I think about our people that, they come to church and they're so filled up and they love being around the people that are here and stuff like that. And they have a wonderful day on Sunday. And then it's just first thing Monday morning, they go back to their secular jobs, or if they're having a struggle in their marriage, if they're having a struggle with their kids, and then they go back to that. And like you said, their minds are so focused on all of these things that are not going right or going well in their life. And it's so easy to lose sight of Jesus, or just feel his grace can't reach down this far to me. I'm so down. It just can't reach me. Or, that's a special person that God has chosen to do that, or whatever it may be. And so I think it's so important just for anybody listening today. God's grace is available for you, and he wants you to receive it. It's there for you to take. And so, because I know, it's really easy to just get burdened down by life and just to feel like you're not worthy. And, but God says that you are, and he sent his son, and it's by nothing that we've done, but everything that he did. And so, like we said at the beginning of this, just recognizing that and stepping into that and living in that every single day, and just see how once you submit to that, he will radically change your life. You'll be so amazed at just the things, like I said, and I was talking to the youth kids last week, and I just said, literally, I was standing up there and I was looking at all of them. And the other day I had made a post on my Facebook 11 years ago about graduating high school, and the person that I was then, the things that I was doing then, there is no way that you could have told me that 11 years from then that I would be standing in front of a group of students telling
But
them
God.
about Jesus. Yeah,
But
you know,
God.
telling them about Jesus. And I'm just like, you know, it's, I mean, it really is possible. It's like, it's not this far-fetched thing. It's just something like you said, even with the Connect kids, like it's something, I mean, you do have to receive it, and you have, you know, but it's there for you to receive, and it's, and you'll be so amazed. Like, and I know a lot of us can look back on our life already and see the places that God's brought us through, but maybe it just feels like where we are right now might be very impossible. Or like, I know for me, like early on in mine and Chris's marriage, like we were having a really hard time, and it was hard for me because I did not have any biblical marriages to look up to. I had zero example of good marriages in my family whatsoever. Like, you know, there was divorce all over the place and brokenness all over the place. Again, like love my parents, love my grandparents, different things like that. But there was nobody that I really felt like I could go to. And again, you know, Chris and I had went to my home church, and it was like good people there. Like you said, it's not that they're bad people or anything like that, but it's just like you just don't bring those things into this place. Like it's kind of like you just come in here and cleaned up, and you put this look on your face, and you check your checkbox for the week, and then whatever goes on inside your home, that's what goes on inside your home. And then everybody's surprised whenever you end up saying, hey, we're separating, or hey, we're getting a divorce. You know, nobody saw it coming because you don't talk about those things. And so anyways, like I know that was very hard for us to walk through, but you know, we started coming to church here, and like you said, we started hearing about grace, and we started hearing about, you know, like God is for you, and God has a plan for marriage, and it's, you know, a great thing. And so anyways, I'm kind of rambling now, but I just think like it's really just amazing whenever I look back and I know the exact moment that I really did surrender my life to Christ, and I can see from that moment everything changed. And so don't put yourself in a box. Don't put God in a box like that, because I'm telling you, like we talk about Paul, but we can give you so many examples here. Like if you're the kind of person where it's hard for you to imagine because you read it from the Bible, but that person's not in front of your face, and it's just something you've heard about your whole life, because that's kind of like with me. I'm like, okay, really? Like even whenever I would hear about David and Goliath and stuff like that, I'm just kind of like, really, there was a guy that was that big? Like I just really can't like envision that. You know what I mean? So like sometimes I have a hard time doing it, but you know, we talk about all the time how nobody, like people can sit there and argue Bible facts, and they can argue all of these things about theology and different things like that, but no one can argue your story. And so it's so important how you carry yourself and how you talk about what God's done in your life, and that you're open about that, because nobody can ever argue your story. And that's why I try to be like, just again, so firm with even my 12th grade girls that I talk to that are graduated now. I don't want to talk about it, but anyways, I talk to them all the time. It's just like, tell your friends, you want people to know like this grace does exist, and it's real, and it's changed my life in the most amazing way. And sometimes it's all it takes is having a conversation with somebody, and you never know how God can work through that, you know, just to change that person's life and put it on a different path. So
Absolutely.
Yep.
That's a mic drop right there.
Well, all right. Well, I guess we'll drop the mic then. In that case, y'all have anything else you want to cover from today? Anything coming up next week? Just looking ahead.
All things Connect Camp.
Yeah. All things Connect. I wore my shirt today. I did. I know we were talking about the other week. Todd was like, nobody ever wears their camp staff shirts after camp. And I'm like, I kept mine. I like the color. I like it. And so, yeah, we were chatting about Connect Camp this morning. So, parents, if you're listening to this, somebody was telling me that there is a 5th grade boy who was listening to our podcast. Was it you?
Yes. Oh, my word.
Tell me.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we've been doing like a lot of the, you know, filling in here recently, whether it's for the field day stuff, duty free lunches, you know, getting plugged in with the different schools in the area.
Right.
And, just for the kids' sake, I won't say which school, but one of the elementary schools we were in. And anyway, we were doing the duty-free lunch for them. And it's one of our 5th graders that goes here to the church. And we went over there, and I happened to be assigned his class, and they were doing like a special thing where it was like an extended lunch for them, an extra 15 minutes. And so they were allowed to, like if the teacher wanted them to stay in the cafeteria the whole time, they could, but we were allowed to also take them back to the classroom. Their teacher said, hey, you can just take them back to the classroom, so that's what I did. I go in there. Well, she said if they want to play some games, whatever else they can. And so some of them, they were, you know, doing just little odds and ends things. This kid comes in there and he pulls out his laptop and starts playing the podcast from in here. and it was the I'm trying to remember which one it was. But anyway, he goes through and he's
That's
like,
awesome.
I know.
well, he's playing the podcast, and I asked him, I said, you watch the podcast? He said, yeah, I watch every single one. He said, I'm sorry though. He said, I missed the last couple of weeks. He said, but I'm catching up right now. Then he goes and he pulls 2 other students with him and makes them sit down beside him. And then
that's awesome.
and because they were sitting with him, he couldn't use the headphones anymore. So he took the headphones out, and now here he is, just got it. You hear the 3 of y'all just sitting here talking in the middle of that elementary school, teaching the gospel right there, all because the student did it. And see, and that's what people don't realize. Like the gospel, like there are ways for it to get into the schools. Like it is not so black and white that people think it is. And so it was just such an awesome opportunity. So obviously, like I commended him for that. I was like, dude, I want you to know, like that is huge. That is absolutely huge.
Sometimes the things that Todd talks about on here, it's not that it's bad, but you just think about a 5th grader like trying to take all of that in. But
it's a lot better than what else they see out in culture.
They see and hear so much. So I bring that up because I'm like, I say parents, if you're listening to this, but also students, if you're listening to this with your friends, if you're still at elementary age, it's completed kindergarten through completed 5th grade. So even if you're a 5th grader who's going into 6th grade in August of 2026, you can still participate in Connect Camp. It's a 1-week camp and you are here all day. Kids are here all day from 8 a.m. until 5 p.m. literally. And it is $264, but they have payment plans through Connect Camp and it's really, really affordable. I was looking at this thing the other day. I think that I pulled up, I think it was Discovery Place Kids in Huntersville. I was doing something on there and they have like a 3-hour little session thing that they're doing for like science and stuff. And it was like $210 for like 3 hours, like one day. And so I was like, parents, if you realize, and again, I know sometimes people have to like prepay for childcare and different things like that, but this is less than the cost of childcare for your kid. And they are getting the gospel all week. Pastor Kevin, give us their 4 points again that you said, that how they give their gospel presentation.
God gave, God loved, we receive, or we believe, we receive.
Yep. And so it's that
Imagine
simple.
your child getting those 4 things down.
Yep. And they learn it all week, but they're doing fun, interactive activities all week. Like we were blown away at how well done this whole program was. Like we just couldn't believe it. And so we want your child to be a part of that. And so again, that's the last week of July. I think it's July 27th through July 31st. So you still got some time to sign up. But like I said, if you want to be part of that payment plan, they offer that to families and different things like that. So make sure you get your child signed up because you promoted it this morning. We're starting to promote more on social media and out in the community. So these spots are going to fill up fast and you want to make sure your kid gets a place here that week. So yeah.
In our Waterlife church family, we're hoping for 100% engagement.
Right.
There's something everybody can do.
Yep.
Whether it be pray, whether it be serve, whether it be donate, whether it be host.
Yep.
And of course, all of us can be inviting. We know children out there.
Yep.
And so one of those 5 things we encourage all Waterlife Church family to engage in.
Yep.
And I do want to say too, real quick, like talking about that being engaging with it. I know a lot of times people have the understanding of like, well, I can't afford to take off of work for that long, or I can't like that again, even if it's from the serving, it's not requiring every single day. It's like take the time, take even if it's just a little bit one day, but every little bit matters, because at the end of the day, nobody knows. Like let's say you could only make it for 2 hours on Wednesday, for example. Well, guess what? During those 2 hours, there might be that one kid that just nobody's been able to get through the whole week, but you happen to be the one that God has strategically placed in order for them to understand that very grace that we've been talking about this whole time.
Absolutely.
Yep. And I know also, I just want to say, I know we've got a lot of business owners here in the church and people who like work in front desk, office jobs and things like that. If you own your business and like if you send out an email to a bunch of your employees, or like if you work at a front desk somewhere and you've got like a community bulletin board out in the lobby, we have resources here at the church. We've got big posters, we've got small like postcard size things. Like we've got all kinds of resources. So if you're interested in helping us to spread the word, because majority of the people that we saw here last year, it was word of mouth. So they either went to church here or it was like a friend had directly invited them. There was a few people that came from Facebook and things like that, but for the most part it was word of mouth. So it really is, a powerful thing just to be able to go out and talk about your experience. And we've got recap videos and recap photos, and we can show show you how great the week was. We don't even have to talk about it. But again, like you said this morning, we saw kids come to Christ. We saw kids having those gospel conversations, and really just a life-changing week for so many kids. So we want as many kids as possible to be a part of that. So we're looking forward to that coming up. That's the big thing that we're trucking ahead to going into the summer. So like I said earlier, Todd is going to hopefully be back in 2 weeks, but we are going to be in D.C. next week. You were talking about our student leadership team and different things like that, and so we're going to be taking them. It's a group that they're a part of called Palmetto Leads, so we'll be taking, I think, 9 of our student leaders on a trip to D.C. Starting on Sunday, and so we've got a lot of things going on, lots of discipleship efforts going on here around the church, and like you said earlier, big things happening with our Next Gen ministries and stuff like that. So engage, be a part of what God is doing here, because he's on the move. And
Absolutely.
we're blessed to be a part of it. So
Absolutely.
All right. Well, I guess that's all from us today. So thanks for tuning in, and we look forward to being here with you next week.